Good evening and glory be to Jesus Christ. Tonight is the first night of a series of nights where we're going to be having classes on icon writing, liturgy, Slavic history, and also how our history has shaped our present. Tonight we have Father Damien Higgins, who is an accomplished iconographer who is also a good friend of mine. I'll tell you that we met 15 years ago. He was on a landing between two staircases at Holy Transfiguration Monastery. While I was leaving with my wife and parents, he came out and said, "Hello, wait, you need to stay and have potluck." So I don't know if he remembers that, but I do. He is the founder and director of Holy Wisdom School of Iconography in Augusta, Georgia. I've been there. He lives right kitty corner from the church. It's a wonderful place to go and to pray. He is in the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church. He's serving as the priest in residence at St. Ignatius Melkite Greek Catholic Church in Augusta, Georgia. And I would also like to immortalize today, my wife gave birth to my daughter Mary this morning at 1:36 a.m. So now that it's on film, without further ado, I'd like to present Father Damien Higgins.
Thank you. Thank you for welcoming me to your beautiful, warm part of the world. I've come here from Philadelphia, although I live much of the year, or try to live much of the year in Augusta. My home is more of the road and airports and whatnot, because there is such a great fascination with the holy icons. There's a great desire among many people, some of them not even Christian, to understand how it is that these paintings are affecting people, sometimes in very significant ways. I'd like to begin with a reading from the Gospel of St. John, where Jesus speaks to them again and says, "I am the light of the world," John 8:12. "He who follows me shall not walk in darkness, but will possess the light of life." Will possess that life. Will possess that light. This, of course, Jesus proclaims this after the woman that's been brought to him caught in adultery. And while everyone else is seeing her in a very particular way, it is Christ who frees her from darkness by not looking at her for whatever evil she may have done, but recognizes her as a child of God, as a daughter of the Most High God. He sees not the darkness that is accidental, but the light that is proper to her. I oftentimes like to emphasize to people something that even we Christian people tend to venture into heresy over, and that's we will take things like light and darkness, good and evil, demonic powers and the power of God, and we'll make them equal opposites, when in fact light is in no way equal to darkness. It's much greater. God is so much greater than the powers of Satan. And not that those aren't real, not that the darkness and demons and evil and all of that isn't real. But just to give you an example, and if I've used this with you before, I beg your apologies, but while I was living at the monastery, we didn't have much electrical light on the outside. And so to find your way from the little cabins that we lived in back to the church, we had a vigil at 3 o'clock in the morning, and some mornings it was very dark, and it was expected that you would carry your light with you, have a flashlight, so when you got out of bed, as whatever kind of stupor you were in, you would find your way to the chapel. Well, I didn't have my flashlight with me, and yet I saw off near the church a very small light. That light directed me. Now understand, this is hundreds of acres of land where there was nothing but trees and forest. I shouldn't say nothing. It was full of beautiful trees and forests and mountains. And the sky was all dark. Acres upon acres of darkness. And yet in all of that darkness, there was this little light. And the light was near the church, so I used it kind of as a guideline, a little bit slipping and falling as I found my way. Oops, I have to stay near the blue light. There's a blue light up here. I'm supposed to stay near the speaker here. Not any bigger than the blue light on this machinery here was a little glowworm. And you've heard the song, "Glow, little glowworm, glimmer, glimmer." Well, that's because the rear end of a glowworm lights up in California. Out here you have the fireflies. Well, we have glowworms in California. And that little light was greater than all the darkness around it. Light and darkness are not equals. And some of you might say, well, I came to hear about iconography. What the heck does that have to do? Glowworms, rear ends, and light. The icons are all about the principle and the symbol of light. You cannot understand a holy icon from a Christian perspective without understanding the light. Here, since we've just finished celebrating Pascha, and then we've gone through the Ascension and all the effects of the resurrection, and now even we're in this time of Pentecost, and eventually we'll be moving to one of the effects, just because these are recently painted icons, and I had them with me up in Philadelphia. I was able to bring them with me. One of the great effects of the resurrection is also the Dormition, when the Mother of God is also brought up into heaven with her body. Christ is light. This is a little bit of an unusual, this is a repainting. Those of us that teach iconography traditionally, we're usually just copying traditional images, trying to be faithful to the tradition. This is out of the book that was recently printed on the icons from Mount Sinai at St. Catherine's Monastery. And you'll notice that Christ is all dressed in white. He is light. Not unsimilar to the moment of the babe in Bethlehem at the nativity icon. The baby is also dressed all in white. And this is, in reality, although we oftentimes, and I know some of you already know this, we oftentimes refer to this as the resurrection icon. This is actually the moment before the resurrection. This is the moment when Christ goes down into the depths of Hades into that darkness, and he overcomes it. He destroys the power of darkness. These are the gates of Hades. And the chains and the locks. Sometimes we even see a symbol of death itself in a little man painted down here. Conquered. Christ has the victory over death, conquering death by death. And with him, he raises up our first parents, Adam and Eve. I often remind people, notice that they're clothed, that Adam and Eve in the garden, St. Simeon the New Theologian says that Adam and Eve were clothed with light. That's why they experienced nakedness, is because when they were in the garden, they were clothed as God is clothed. Because in Psalm 103, it's clear that God wears a cloak of light. Right at the beginning of that psalm that we pray at Vespers, God, there might be different versions of this, but God is clothed or arrayed in a garment of light. So Adam and Eve recover their garments of light. Then we celebrate the moment after the resurrection. Traditionally speaking, we're not supposed to image the moment of the resurrection. Christ coming out of the tomb, carrying the Polish flag, you oftentimes see displayed, stepping on the poor little soldiers that are sound asleep there. That moment is not spoken of in sacred Scripture. Even the writers inspired by the Holy Spirit were not allowed to refer to that moment. And that's not in any way that we as traditional Christians would in any way question that happened. It's just that it's too sacred of a moment to speak of, and therefore the icon writer avoids painting that moment. So we paint the moment before and we paint the moment after, when the myrrh-bearing women approach the tomb and they discover both the angel that is pointing to the wrappings of Christ's shroud. So light is always coming out of the icon. There's never, when you're imaging something from nature or something in nature, the light in this room is going to hit this three-dimensional object in a certain way. And as the light hits it, it doesn't work really well with fluorescent lights. Oh, it's the blue tube here, blue light. It will create a shadow. Well, in heaven there can be no darkness, no shadow, no death, no vanishing point. So in the icon, the light is indiscriminately coming out of, again, this is another icon in process, painted just on an old church cabinet. But I insist on using real wood. I try to avoid using anything that is synthetic, because we're taking things from the earth as God created them. And it's almost like Christians should be, and we are, the true ecologists, because we know that God created all things. Not that we worship creation. That's the distinction between the Christian and the pantheist. We believe not that God is, that everything is God, that God is in the tree or God is in the rock and therefore we worship the rock or we worship the tree, but that all things are in God. All things are contained in the creative energies and powers of God. He brings all things into existence by His love and His power. Well, so the icon, we're using all these things from nature. Wood, of course, being the most maybe obvious connection. Sometimes we forget that trees are very sacred to Christians because of the tree of the cross. In all of our celebrations of the Holy Cross, we make references to the cross as a tree. And we even refer to it as a person. We give it a personal quality. O you tree, upon which our salvation was made manifest. It might appear that we worship trees, but we don't. But we understand that the tree now plays a role in being that vessel, that altar, whereby Christ shed His blood for our salvation. So we can never look at a tree. History has been changed by that interaction between the God who was before invisible and incomprehensible and unnameable, who has now become incarnate in Jesus Christ. That part of the revelation of God's mercy was revealed on a tree. We got locked out of the garden because of a tree, and we get invited back in because of a tree. And so icons very specifically are painted on trees, on wood. Now there are a lot of practical reasons for that too, but we won't go into that. We want to keep this part of it theological. Much of what I do, I've been for the last 5 weeks, I've been up with a lot of Ukrainian folks, not all of whom spoke English, teaching the painting of icons, the preparing of boards, and the making of paints. So that's what I'm really good at, but I'm kind of as a side issue, and because I was on my way back down to Augusta, Father Mark and Gordon forced me to come here and speak to you good people, thinking that, well, it was just on the way, and then the Joaquims fed me, so I had no choice. I had to come and speak for my meal. But the light in an icon is coming out of each of the figures. You'll notice that these angels, and again, they're not all finished yet, but nevertheless, there's no shadow being created by their bodies. Each of them is radiating light equally. They all have equal value. And then they're holding a mandorla, a circular image of Christ, radiating out, and He Himself is like fire. Remember that connection with the burning bush. There are a lot of titles that we give in the Eastern churches to the Theotokos, to the Mother of God. And one of the references is to the burning bush, because like that material bush or plant in the desert that was on fire but was not destroyed, so Mary holds Christ in her very body and is not destroyed by that interaction. God is an all-consuming fire, and yet that fire is a fire that gives life in Jesus Christ. So we have this kind of light. That's the hard thing when you're teaching people to paint icons, and I know I have a few iconography students here. Maybe they've progressed beyond just the primary stages, for all I know. But nevertheless, the hard thing for them to learn is to get the light to radiate out. A lot of people do what I call is white abuse. They overuse white. They want white to be the disseminator of light. Too much white in the icon creates a chalkiness. Just one other thing about white. White is we have elements of white in creation, but white in general, the fact that now we paint many of our rooms white, that's perfectly okay as long as you have color around that white. White by itself, if you have white ceilings, white walls, white floors, they say they've done studies on the mentally ill, and they say if you're mentally ill and you put a mentally ill person in an all-white room, you'll go crazier. You'll get kookier. You'll get more violent. And if you're not cuckoo and you put you in an all-white room, you might become cuckoo. So because the human eye needs color. The world around us, I was kind of hiding from some of you and walking through the back rooms there and looking out the windows, and we're surrounded by color. You people here in Raleigh are just surrounded by green. And just sitting in the Joachim in their little dining room area there, being able to look out on the beautiful trees that were dancing in the wind and waving, and maybe they were even singing out there. I couldn't hear through the windows, but all of creation celebrates the presence of God. So that's one of the reasons why we use, Adam and Eve, after they lost their original glory, they stole from the trees their glory. Because the trees didn't lose their relationship with God. We did. So they go and they take leaves and cover themselves. Because the leaves were still beautiful. And they wanted to be beautiful. And maybe that's why I always tell people that this was made for me by a Ukrainian church up in Winnipeg, and they gave it to me. And the first time I put it on, I said, "Ooh, I feel like Fulton Sheen." I figure maybe if I don't preach well, I'll at least be able to look well. The other thing about light is that people will oftentimes imagine or notice that the eyes in an icon are rather larger than our normal human proportions. In Coptic iconography and in Ethiopian iconography, you'll notice that they're even larger, sometimes 4 times the size of natural proportions. Some of the churches, right now I'm actually working with a Coptic Orthodox community in painting their church, and they kept bringing in these models of churches. When I looked at the picture, it looked like the whole church was just full of eyeballs. So that when you walk into these buildings, you're being seen. You're being surrounded by a vision. It's because it's not just, sometimes we imagine that it is merely us, I am coming before the holy icon, I am praying, I'm trying to see the angels. We call this the synaxis, or the gathering of the archangels. I've included the cherubim and the seraphim. Or here, that I am coming before the Dormition of the Mother of God, and I am trying to see that mystery. There's something beautiful said in this book on the icons from Sinai, that when we approach the face of a saint, here at St. Peter, when you look at an icon, the saint in the icon does indeed look back at you. The frontal face, large eyes, symmetrical design, and brilliant gold ground command your attention. The icons are speaking to you. Gestures, glances, and especially inscriptions allow the holy person to address you, the faithful, who pray to and through the icon. Icons are doors, they are gates, they are windows, but not in the Renaissance sense of a painting as a window into another world. The saint depicted is on or in front of the picture plane. Icons are thus places where the divine enters the space of the beholder. The icon, when we put an icon up in our churches or in our homes, that is a place where we are allowing God and the saints to break forth into our space. Now, it's true also that we are trying to enter into the kingdom of God. But what does Jesus say? If you want to get in, if you want to get into the kingdom that I speak of, you must become like a little child. So the icon does something to help you do that. If you look at the buildings here on this Dormition icon, they have a strange, it would appear the artist or the iconographer, in this case myself, didn't know what they were doing as far as the presentation of the buildings, and that sometimes is true. In this case, I did know what I was doing just because I was trying to copy a very nice original. And you'll notice that, say, like, for example, an icon that many people are familiar with, the 3 angels that we oftentimes refer to as the Trinity or the hospitality of Abraham and Sarah. We have the 3 angels gathered around what appears to be an altar with a little chalice. If you look carefully, you'll notice that the altar and the footstool that carries the feet of the angels is actually reversed perspective. when I look out the window here, out these windows, I have what we call normally, in kind of simple terms, natural perspective, where everything is disappearing off into the distance. Everything is dying in this world. This is a painting of this world. This is a painting or an icon of that world where everything lives forever. And we're invited into that kingdom. But you have to become like a little child. And so reverse perspective makes you, the viewer, the vanishing point. You have to become a little person. A little Persian, some people say. A little person in order to get in there. So these are all kind of tricks, as it were, or codes to help the viewer use this. Now, obviously, much of this is unconscious. There weren't people writing down all the details of why we're going to do this and how we're going to affect the viewer. But that's part of the value of us as church. Our collective response to the Holy Spirit, and not just in our time in this place, but throughout history, continues to be enriched insofar as we don't reject the tradition, but carry it into our present day. This is one of the reasons why I insist on using, for making the icons, the traditional method. And that's not to say that people that are painting with acrylics or using plywood are bad people, or even bad iconographers. I met an iconographer up in Philadelphia who's probably a saint and a very holy priest, painting the icons, doing much fasting and prayer, and he uses acrylics, plastic. God forbid, but nevertheless, so this is not a criticism of the person. But what happens when you use synthetic materials is you have this kind of a bond. This paint here, if it was thick enough, we could peel it off. It doesn't bond with the sheetrock. And that's true of even the plywood itself, is actually sheets of individual material that have been bonded together, but not like this. When we prepare an icon board, we soak it with skin glues that actually go into the wood, so that this old church pew is going to get a new life. Now, this one man from our church down in the Melkite Church in Augusta, he found these pews that were being thrown out from another church, so he saved them all. And I've been using them for icons because they're beautiful. It's beautiful wood, solid wood. It's been sat on for many years, but by holy rear ends and people praying, and it's now has a new life. It's being renovated to glorify God. I mean, again, a continuation of its work in the church, as it were, and now maybe in a more exalted fashion. But the wood is soaked with rabbit skin glue, and then we take the altars from the church that can no longer be used because they're stained or they're burned. And normally we burn those, but I just actually have my car is full of stuff, and poor Mrs. Joachim almost had to walk over here because there was no room for her. It was all full of linens and stuff that I had stole from the Ukrainian nuns up in Philadelphia, because otherwise they were going to throw all this stuff out or burn it. But I told the sister there that I can use it because then we stretch the linen on top of the wood, and it's also soaked with rabbit skin glue. So the bond between the linen that is underneath this gesso is crushed marble and rabbit skin glue, and then it's polished, but that's bonded with the linen. So you have wood, linen, and gesso all bonded together like this. And if you want to get any of those elements apart, you're going to have to use a chisel and a hammer. They are truly integrated. And this is supposed to be representative of what takes place to us in prayer. That the icon is in itself an expression of prayer. It's not that we worship the wood or the paint. However, we're not afraid to say that material things, and this is critical, matter. We believe, traditional Christians do believe, that matter, material things, have the capacity to convey spiritual realities. Because that's what took place at the Incarnation. If you don't believe this, you don't believe that Jesus was a real human body with real DNA and real, cells. And that human body had the capacity to convey the full reality of the Godhead. And so that's something why we're always defending the icons, not for the icons themselves, but because of our faith that we believe in the Incarnation. That Jesus wasn't a phantasm. He wasn't just some part of our imagination finally realized in a fantastical form. He was a real human person, a real material member of a historical society at a particular time and place with real flesh and blood. That's what distinguishes Christianity from every other religion. And it distinguishes Orthodox or traditional Christians from every other Christian. Is we constantly believe that material things, it's true we also venerate the Bible. We kiss the Bible, not because we believe that leather or vellum or paper is divine, but because we believe that it has the capacity to convey divine realities, to convey the very Word and presence of God. And most of our Protestant brothers and sisters would respect that and would appreciate that. Some Christians and even some Western Catholics might have a problem with the idea that we're giving so much attention to wood, color, and paint. But it's because we understand the theology that it's communicating. Okay, the other thing this is nothing else to remind myself about an eyeball here. The eye is the way in which we receive light. So if light is the most important operative principle in understanding an icon, then the eye of the saints, or the angels, or the Christ, or the Mother of God, they have the pupil is usually larger than it's dilated. And you know that's what happens to a natural eye. When we're in a very bright room like this, and if it were to become dark outside and we go outside, our eyes, our pupils dilate. Well, this is to remind us that they dwell in a place full of light, and they're looking out into our world where the light is dimmed. And so it's all a very scientific reality. And again, I'm not sure that the iconographers had figured all that out. But it is certainly what happens. And especially you see that in the Coptic and the Ethiopian icons, where the large eyes are particularly the element in the icon that grabs you and that invites you in. I know, Father Mark, you're going to zap the buzzer at a certain point. Is this the moment? Okay, well, I just want to show you, sometimes I require people to watch just 4 or 5 minutes of Sister Wendy. Sister Wendy, as some of you may know, teaches about art on the BBC. And she has a wonderful capacity of teaching people how to see, how to use your regular little old eyeballs, even if they're damaged in some capacity, to see art. She looks at all kinds of art. In this, she's going to be looking at some stained glass windows. Now, I always warn people, you have to ignore her teeth. She has big teeth, but that's not the point. It's not her teeth. It's her eyes that we want you to focus on. And we're going to try to be organized about this and see if we can get this to work properly. Yes, give us air. What happened to the air? It was cold before, and now it's cold. Okay, what did I do here? Did I do the, oh, that, turn on that machine. Or did I turn this machine on? Oops. Okay, let's see. Play, please.
It's an overpowering experience to be here and to be actually seeing slowly and in detail what must be one of the most magnificent and profound passion narratives anywhere.
Well, Wendy, welcome to King's.
Thank you very much, George.
And I'm particularly pleased that you've come to share with me the view of these windows that aren't perhaps the first thing that people notice when they come in here, but they're one of the great wonders of the chapel.
Well, the thing about stained glass windows is that they're almost an example, a paradigm of what art is. Because art always wants to let the light shine through. Not necessarily visibly, but if it's great art, then we're illuminated by it. So as to have windows where visibly the light comes through great paintings. It's over the top almost in its rightness.
A lot of people wouldn't regard stained glass as great art, would they? They'd see it more as a kind of craft or
George, say no more, because this distinction really upsets me, that craft and art are different. You can't look at this chapel with those carvings and those windows and say, mere craftsmen. No, these were artists. I mean, often sometimes not very good artists, but here these are good artists. I mean, wonderful shapes, wonderful colours, wonderful understanding of the story.
some of the drawing is actually quite exquisite, and I'm sure that some of the close-ups will show that. Something you can't always appreciate from ground level.
We're so lucky to be here. And if I can move it from art to a higher level, the whole story of the Passion can be such a dark story, can fill us with such grief and compassion, and of course so it should. But it was a story that always had light coming through. The resurrection was implicit in the Passion right from the start. So to be looking at Passion windows, where the light is always coming through, has a wonderful spiritual as well as an artistic meaning.
One of the extraordinary things about windows is the way in which, at one level, you can look at them as simply a mass of colour, the geometrical shapes, almost like a jewel design. And yet gradually, as you look at them, the story begins to take shape out of this abstract form, and you start to see the very human and the very divine things that are going on in them.
Well, that's true, I think, of all art. You can't quickly take it in. If it's real art, it's going to demand slow looking. You know the famous expression, the one thing you need to appreciate art is a chair. And of course, the one thing you need to appreciate the Passion, I won't exactly say a chair, but you need time. You need to look. And just as in great art, light in the sense of illumination, insight, comes flooding in as you slowly take in what you're looking at. So in both a literal sense, in stained glass windows, and in a spiritual sense, that's what's happening here. The longer we look, the more we'll see, the more we'll be enlightened.
The more we look, the more we will see, and then the possibility of being enlightened. That's what we're doing when we pray in front of the icon. We're trying to learn how to see. We're trying to see the world of God, the things of God, and also then to see ourselves and the world around us from the perspective of God. You know, Art Linkletter was visiting recently. I was listening. He's like 93, 94 years old. I assume he's still, I think it was a living interview. It was on the Christian radio program while I was coming down from Philadelphia. It could have maybe, is he still alive? Does anybody? He's still around. Very mature man now. Sounded very much alive on the radio broadcast. And he was saying how he visited this Jewish community down in Florida that was an assisted living compound or environment primarily for people struggling with Alzheimer's. And but it was a very nice facility, and so he thought he was going to go and give one of his little pep talks, and he thought before he gave the talk he'd go around and introduce himself to the people, and being that he's quite the comedian, well-known television personality, that people know him. But he went up to this one woman who was looking at him somewhat quizzically, and he questioning maybe who he was. So he went up to her and he said, do you know who I am? And she said, no, but if you go to the front desk, they'll tell you. And that's part of what we want to happen in front of the icons. We want to have this recognition by God of who we are, that we belong to the icon, that even this mystery, I think especially, and many of you have experienced this, obviously not for yourselves yet, but when you've encountered death, especially of people that we love. Our beloved pastor, Father Daniel Munn, down at the Melkite Church, used to always say, you cannot grieve what you do not love. And so when people would come to him in terrible grief over the death of a spouse or someone that they loved, a family member, a friend, or of a marriage or whatever it was that had died, he'd compliment them in a sense and say, well, you loved that person. What a wonderful grace, because you can't grieve what you don't love. And of course we really experienced that. Then he went ahead and died on us, audacious as he was, and so we were all grieving, but we remembered his words, and we put those words up in the church hall over his picture to remind us that our grieving for his going to the Lord was a deep wound, but it was also a great grace, that his presence among us was a great grace as he built up the little Melkite church there in Augusta. And then this icon becomes a celebration of what we know to be true, even maybe sometimes when we're in the grips of the crucifixion. The superior up at the Ukrainian mother house where I was visiting is suffering from shingles. So the house superior had asked me to go up and give Mother Laura a blessing. So I went up there. And I recounted for her something that I had heard from Mother Teresa, because I could tell, the superior was just, really in a lot of pain and discomfort, and a very sweet woman, and a woman of great prayer and faith, and yet pretty uncomfortable. And Mother Teresa gave a talk in San Francisco when she was establishing her novitiate there. And she said that she remembered some of the first people that she brought in off the street. And this one woman was particularly injured by maggots in her body. She had been laying in the street for many weeks and even months, and had literally been dying in the gutter. Mother Teresa had brought her back. They had cleaned her up, but she was still enduring a lot of suffering as she approached death. And Mother Teresa said to her, "Just remember, my daughter, that in your suffering, Jesus is kissing you. He's drawing so close to you because you have joined Him on the cross." And this woman, without blinking, said to Mother Teresa, "Please tell Jesus to stop kissing me." We don't necessarily want to go looking for the crucifixion, but it comes, and death will come. While I was up in Edmonton painting a church, Holy Door Mission, there was the terrible death of two boys that had been ice skating, as happens up in the frozen hinterlands, ice skating there on a pond, and the ice broke and they were both drowned. And so it was this incredible grief and terrible pain and suffering. And during the funeral, they were going to, fortunately the church had its little graveyard right next to the church. They buried him out at one of the country churches, the two boys. And as they were coming out of the church, they raised, as is the custom up there, these banners with the face of Christ and the Mother of God. And the banners come from the tradition of battle. They're victory banners. And so that's even what we're doing during our Pascha celebration, is we're celebrating the victory even while we're still in the midst of the battle against the power of death. Christ is risen from the dead, conquering or trampling or whatever you say, death by death. We raise those banners while it looks like we're still losing. Maybe a little bit like Hillary Clinton. I'm still winning by popular vote or whatever it is. Not to get political here, but we'll keep away from all that. Okay, so we've got light. We have eyes that receive light. But all of that is requiring our capacity to look in order to see, and then by that seeing to be transformed by what we see. The heart becomes the battlefield for good and evil. That place that is meant to be the place of communion with the divine, where we hear the voice of God, we see the face of God, we walk with God, and we feel God's embrace. That's part of what we mean by restoring Adam and Eve, is that Adam and Eve heard God's voice. They walked hand in hand with God. They felt His presence. All those things that we've lost, they recovered. They lost them too, but they recover them through the power of this resurrection. And there, the cross is no longer merely a symbol of torture, but it's a victory symbol. And so we too, we want to open up, as the Old Testament would refer to, the eyes of our heart. Solzhenitsyn, that great Russian writer, in his introduction to the book on the gulags, the Russian concentration camps, spoke about the fact that, as was the Marxist ideal, if you could take all the bad people, and you know bad people, you have bad people in your life, it might even be, somebody nearby, if we could just put them over here in a little encasement and destroy them, the world would be so much better. He said that was really the mentality of Marxism, that there are these good people and then there's the bad people. And the bad people, they have to be destroyed. The problem is, he says, is that the line that divides good and evil exists in every human heart. And we constantly, by the grace of God, are given the power to choose good. Now it's true, we also have the power to choose bad. And that's a bad thing. And that's what needs to be overcome, is that capacity for doing evil. And we see enough of it around us. Oftentimes people say, oh, well, we don't live in a very iconographic world. My goodness, we live in a world full of images. You can't drive from Philadelphia to Raleigh, North Carolina without being, if you go through any city, every picture from McDonald's to Hooters is yelling at you, trying to sell you something iconographically. And yet it's all for market. It takes something from us. And it's not just our money. It takes something of our soul from us. A lot of the imagery and artwork around us, it's like marketing tools. And not necessarily evil in itself, but just, even signs that are trying to sell you a new television set. It's always like we are a marketable item. We are to be marketed to. The icon isn't trying to sell you anything. The icon is just simply blessing you. And that's why, like when I walked into the home this afternoon, the first thing I see is these images of holy icons. And I felt blessed by them. Now it's true, I have a little icon right there on the car thing there. There are a few times when, those people in front of you that are going too fast or bumping into you want to bless them. But by keeping the icons in front of us, they remind us what we're supposed to be and what we're supposed to become. They're not trying to sell you anything. They're not trying to take anything from you. They're trying to give back to you. They're trying to feed you with that life of heaven. The icon of the descent into Hades is an affirmation of absolute hope. As with all icons, to some extent, every icon, even the icon of saints. And sometimes when I'm speaking, I just gave right before I went up to Philadelphia, I gave a presentation to a group of, do we have any Methodists here? Or, no, okay. Well, at the very nice Methodist peoples, I wasn't going to say anything bad, I just wanted to know. You're a Methodist? He was raising his hand. Oh, it's time. Oh, you're giving me the signal? He's a little bit Methodist. He's a saint. Well, that's all right. He can be healed. But no, I was down in Scott, Georgia, and if you look on the map, you probably won't find it because it's not on most maps. It's just a little tiny town. And the pastor of this little Methodist church, they had been reading about icons. So they asked me to come down and give a talk, and I thought this was a setup. This is a town that has one blinking light. There's so few people have stayed in the town that they had to give away the store, and so they now go to Adrian for shopping. You can find Adrian on some maps, but this is really, out there in the boonies. Well, this group of Southern Methodist people has started to study iconography because it's the one Christian art form that they believe now is biblically correct. They have been able to find no contradictions to their Bible-based spirituality with the icons. So much so, now this is really going to throw some of you for a loop. You can't fight Methodists anymore. They're going to name this church Mary, the Mother of God Methodist Church of Scott, Georgia. Now again, there's only 45 people in the church, but nevertheless, that's something to be said. And they've put her name, they just call her Mary, Mother of God. They give her that title over the door of their church. So far, that's what they put in calligraphy. And they would like an icon of the Mother of God, when she has her hands outstretched with Christ in the center. So the pastor has had me come down there on a number of occasions. It's been very interesting. There's some prejudices that they're working with and some things that I just let them, spew forth about how evil Orthodox and Catholic Christians are, and just let it be there because some of it is right, in terms of it's being sinners. And I could certainly raise my hand on a number of these occasions, but the point for that we actually taught, and this might be somewhat controversial, some people would say, well, only, true believing Christians should be painting icons. But I decided with some preparation that we would teach a class on writing the icons. And these people came and they were so prayerful. And the minister made them fast and pray to follow all the rules. And on the second morning, they came to the church, and we would sit, because out of respect for our tradition, he would have me say prayers, but he would have them sit for about a half an hour just to pray quietly. If they wanted to read the Bible, they could do that, but he wanted them to be quiet. And one woman, Mary Alice, she just couldn't be held still, and she finally just said, "Praise God! Hallelujah! I have to say it. I have to thank God that He is so good to me, because I am experiencing His presence here in this work of the holy icons." So another aspect of iconography is that it helps us it could be an evangelical tool. Could be a way to reach people. Not necessarily already church people, but many of the people that are being harassed and bombarded by, the sale of a television or whatever it is that they're trying to sell out there with that marketing iconography. That this is a way that we can go around helping to heal the world that needs the presence of Christ, needs His healing presence. And I remind them too that one of the reasons why we are free to venerate angels or the Mother of God or John the Baptist or Saint Dorotheus or whoever it is that we venerate, and that, they're okay with that notion of separating veneration and worship, except when they see you go down like this and then you're kissing stuff, and it just drives them nuts, But I say to them, part of that is that we believe that John the Baptist, or we believe in the Bible. And it's Paul who himself, isn't it, who says, "It is no longer I who live, but it is Christ who lives in me." So when we celebrate Dorotheus, or we celebrate St. Barbara, or any of this, we are celebrating Christ. They have become transfigured into Christ. Yes, we're celebrating their life, just as we hope to each become icons of Christ. And how wonderful it is that we can celebrate the life of Christ manifested in Mother Teresa, or in, the Mother of God, or in St. Dorotheus or St. Barbara, or whoever. Okay, now we'll give the little Methodist man the break. This is the break? Is this time? Thank you.